That was Alan Lane and his orchestra with the beautiful melody, Just One More Dance. Now it's 3 o'clock and time for Story Time.
Hello, children. Are you ready for today's story? You are? Then I'll begin. It's called The Folly of Mr. Moly. Once upon a time, in a land far, far away, there lived a family known as the Moly family. There was Mr. Moly, Mrs. Moly, and their sweet little daughter who was simply known as Little Miss Moly. Now, Mr. Moly was a highly intelligent man who traveled throughout the land to give talks to many, many audiences and share his incredible wisdom. He had that special gift of being able to communicate with, well, shall we say, the lesser educated. He could talk in a language that they could easily understand. And he would cover so many different topics like problems within human relationships, especially problems caused by women.
Women who choose the assholes will fucking end this race if we don't start holding them fucking accountable.
And a woman wants commitment from the man. I want to keep that dick on a leash, I want to tie it to my clit, and everywhere I walk, I want that dick to follow me. But the question is, how do you put the dick on a leash?
And it was after that lecture that Mr. Moly came up with a wonderful idea. He decided to create his own radio station. That way, he could share his incredible brain with the whole world. And here are the closing words of his very first broadcast.
This show is going to succeed because this is what the world absolutely, desperately, and completely needs for its own survival.
And that was the beginning of the greatest gift that humanity could ever receive. There was only one problem though. He'd built his studio right next door to little Molly's bedroom. At first it was tolerable, but later it became known as Daddy's shouting room. Especially when he was talking about brown people, and it became quite distressing for little Molly, especially when her father got really angry. Poor little girl. Every night she would lie in her bed with her hands covering her ears in the hope that maybe she could get some sleep. But it wasn't to be. Her worst fear was a gentleman called Alex Jones. Mr. Jones was a well-respected investigative journalist who was a good friend of Mr. Moly, and together they were both greatly admired as two crusaders locked in a combined struggle to seek out truth and to share it with the world. Mr. Jones was the man who actually exposed Michelle Obama as being a transvestite, and that squirrels were secret agents working for the CIA. But when those two got together in Daddy's shouting room, it was an absolute nightmare.
Our ancestors fought against tyranny and murder.
I've had enough of these people.
And it's our job to keep it going.
They're a bunch of Christian murdering scum that run giant death factories, keeping babies alive and selling their body parts.
That is the job. We inherit this incredible gift called freedom.
They literally crawl out from under rocks, and they run around screaming, "We love Satan, we want to eat babies."
Poor little Molly. She never quite recovered from that experience. And there was no doubt that this was not a good environment for a little girl to grow up in. And there were many times too when she was deeply hurt by certain telephone conversations that she'd overheard. Like this one.
Oh man, until you have a family, like you have no idea. They are just money detonators. We just went to a botanical garden today, right? You know, for the family it was like $35 to get in. Every time you go out to eat with the kids.
She couldn't believe what she'd heard. The man who had spent a fortune building a studio where he could spew out verbal garbage to the world, but would grudge his wife and daughter a day out at some botanic gardens. There was also another occasion when she composed a little tune on her toy xylophone in the hope that she could maybe perform it on Mr. Moly's Christmas show. But sadly, her father didn't seem to think it was good enough. She cried that night as she lay in her bed, but she felt even more humiliated when she once again heard him talking on the phone to a friend and discussing her inadequate performance.
Yeah, I was just with my daughter today, and she's 4, and she was banging her xylophone, just randomly. And she said, "Daddy, what do you think?" I said, kind of hurts my ears, It doesn't sound good to me at all. She's like, "No, I'm making music." I said, "No, I hate to tell you, but you're not making music. That's why people go to Carnegie Hall and not to your playpen to hear music."
Little Miss Molly was so hurt by this rejection, but still had hope that maybe he would eventually change his mind and possibly let her play a little composition. But alas, when Mr. Molly got word about Noam Chomsky's plan to sing Frosty the Snowman on his Christmas show, Mr. Molly's ego got the better of him.
Well, I'm dreaming.
Little Molly was furious. She tried to get into the shouting room, but the door was locked.
No! Just like the ones we used to know.
And eventually, she had to give up. And with tears in her eyes, she went to bed and finally cried herself to sleep. In the morning, she decided she'd had enough and engaged in a long talk with her mother about all the heartbreak her father was causing. "This is not peaceful parenting," she said angrily. Her mother explained that her father was under a lot of stress, plus the fact that he didn't really have a job, and talking to people through his shouting room was the only way he could make a comfortable living. "So what is his job, Mummy?" said little Molly. "He's a philosopher," replied Mrs. Molly. Little Molly looked puzzled. "So what does a philosopher do?" "Well, your father thinks about things in a very clever way, and then he tells people what he's been thinking, and hopefully they'll give him some money for it." "It's not exactly a proper job, Mother, is it?" said little Molly. "He's just like one of those beggars in the street."
It's a coffee a day to help change the world. Don't you want to be part of something bigger than yourself?
"And what about all the times he completely contradicts himself and says the complete opposite on a show of what he said in another show? I mean, these people who donated are entitled to a refund, no?" Mrs. Molly took her daughter's hand and said, "Molly, I would like you to listen to this." She took a little digital recorder from her pocket, something that she keeps handy for occasions like these. She then pressed the play button.
If it's not for this show and me, people might have to wait another 2,000 years.
"I don't get it. Why are you playing this?" said little Molly. "Okay," said her mother, "I'll play you something else."
I had taken some sandals in to get them repaired.
Her mother then smiled and said, "Well, do you get it now?" "No, I don't," said little Molly. "What are you getting at?" "But you must promise me, Molly," said her mother. "What I'm about to reveal to you, you mustn't tell anyone, not even your school friends, okay?" "I don't have any school friends," said Molly. "Remember?" "Oh, sorry, I forgot about that," said her mother. "Well, don't tell anyone in the family, okay?" "We don't have any family," said Molly. "Oh, yes, of course, sorry. Well, listen to this," said her mother, as she pressed the play button and watched for her daughter's reaction.
2,000 years.
Sandals.
2,000 years.
Sandals.
"Well," said her mother. "Oh, fuck off, Mother," said little Molly angrily. "You're not trying to suggest that he's the second coming of the Messiah, are you?" "Keep your voice down, child," said her mother. "Can't you hear that your father's doing a broadcast?" "Of course I can," said Molly. "And where did you learn that very distasteful language?"
You fucked our grandfathers. Because you fucked our forefathers. That's why men are the way
Little
they are.
Molly
Because
just
men who were different
smiled.
didn't get fucked and didn't reproduce. Their DNA died off.
So many years had passed, and one afternoon, little Molly found herself staring out of a bedroom window and deep in thought. She saw many children out there who were obviously making their way back from school, and it occurred to her that they all looked so happy together. White kids, black kids, Asian kids, all enjoying each other's company and probably learning from each other too. Learning about their different ways, their different lives. Oh, how she wished that she could have been out there with them. Because by now, she believed that the only way to solve our problems was to get to know one another just that little bit better. And don't forget, by this time, The poor little girl had endured yet more of her father's ridiculous shows on Muslims, blacks, and of course, the difference in IQ levels between them and us, the white people. And all those crazy titles her father came up with, like how a woman's menstrual cycle is synchronized with the world banking system. And she despised the way he would talk with callers and throw in little lines just to remind them of how clever he was.
Well, let me tell you, as a non-leftist director, actor, writer, novelist, poet, fiction and non-fiction author,
I did 10 years of violin when I was a kid.
And she's like, oh, aren't you writing your book at the moment? Because I was working on a book. I wrote a screenplay and funded a film. It's called After. It's a good film. I wrote a lot of poetry when I was younger and sort of self-published my own poetry books.
Little Moly realized that it was time to think about her future and what direction she should take to escape this never-ending nightmare. But unfortunately, children, we have to leave it there. But you'll learn a lot more about the folly of Mr. Moly in part 2. In the meantime, I've written a little song about the Moly family. Would you like to hear it? You would? Okay, here we go.
Hey, Mr. Molyneux, what the hell you gonna do when your little girl gets older? She's bound to find the internet and discover things you might regret and end up crying on your shoulder. The shit you talk about could really freak her out. On Facebook, Twitter and YouTube, it's gonna come back on you, dude. Your racist remarks are gonna cause some sparks that could bring her shame and drive the girl insane. Not an argument. Hey, Mr. Molyneux, what the heck you gonna do when your little girl gets older? Oh, splendid. Hey, Mr. Molyneux, what on earth you gonna do if she brings a chap home for dinner? Now supposing he is brown, are you going to sit him down to see if he's a loser or a winner? Will you put the poor lad through a test of his IQ? And if by chance he fails it, please tell me what you'll do. Be careful what you say, you might miss a wedding day. You could end up all alone till your dying day. Say, Mr. Molyneux, tell me what you're gonna do if she decides to defool.